Hello and welcome to Book Circle. I'm Earl Weinberg. This time we will continue our reading of Village School by Miss Reed. For 3 days and 3 nights, the countryside was swept by snowstorms. Only 3 children arrived one morning, and I rang the local education office for permission to close school. The snowplows came out from Caxley to clear the main roads, and a breakdown lorry was able to get to the abandoned dinner van and tow it back to the garage. Mrs. Crossley, despite blood-curdling rumors, was luckily unhurt. At last the snow stopped, and on the 4th day the sun shone from a sky as limpid as a June morning's. The snow glittered like sugar icing, but the temperature remained so low that there was no hope of a thaw. Mr. Roberts had his duck pond swept clear of snow and invited the village to skate. As the pond is a large one and nowhere deeper than 2 feet, mothers were only too delighted to send the children who had been milling about their feet for the past few days, and once school was over, for we opened again when the snowstorm stopped, the children raced joyfully across the road to a superb slide at one edge of the pond. The older generation dug out skates, and so keen were they that Mr. Roberts switched on the headlights of his lorry, and evening parties swirled and skimmed like rare winter swallows while the ice held. Dr. Martin and his wife brought Miss Clare, and the vicar, in a dashing red and white skiing jacket over his clerical grays and the inevitable leopard skin gloves encasing his hands, brought his wife. Miss Parr came with a sister who must have been 80, and all these elderly people came into their own. They waltzed, they glided, they swerved magnificently in figures of 8, while we younger ones tottered tensely round on borrowed skates, or more ignobly still pushed old kitchen chairs before us, and marveled at the grace and beauty of those who were our seniors by 30 years or more. Mrs. Roberts, with true farmhouse hospitality, threw open her great kitchen, and sizzling sausages and hard-boiled eggs and hot dripping toast were offered to the hungry skaters, with beer or cocoa to wash down the welcome food. For a week the fun continued. Then the church weathercock slewed round, a warm west wind rushed to us across the downs, the roofs began to drip, and little rivers trickled and gurgled along the lanes of Fairacre. The thaw had come. We packed away our skates, and Mr. Roberts' ducks went back to their pond again. Chapter 13. The Sad Affair of the Eggs. Joseph Coggs sidled round the half-shut door of his cottage. The baby's pram was just inside and wedged the door securely. After the February sunshine, the little house was dark and smelt of baby's washing and burnt potatoes. Joseph put the cap he was carrying very carefully on the table. "Mom!" he shouted hopefully. There was no reply. He went through to the lean-to scullery and saw his mother through the open door, feeling baby clothes against her cheek. Around her, on the ragged hedge and on the unkempt gooseberry bushes, were innumerable tattered garments, drying as best they could. "Got something for you," said Joseph in his hoarse, cracked voice. His eyes gleamed with excitement. "What, some old trash from school again?" queried his mother crossly. I got a little house I done this afternoon, but I got something special for you." He tugged at her arm, and snatching a few garments from the bushes as she went, his mother submitted to being pulled back to the house. Proudly, Joseph displayed the contents of his cap. 5 brown eggs, with the bloom of that day's laying still upon them. "Where'd you get 'em?" inquired his mother suspiciously. "Mrs. Roberts give 'em to me," said her son, but his fingers drummed uncomfortably on the table edge, and his eyes remained downcast. His mother thought quickly. 5 eggs would be a godsend with things as they were. Now that Arthur was back regular at the Beetle and Wedge, there was mighty little handed over to her for food. It was a pity they'd stopped teasing her husband about that night at Willett's, for while that had been going on, Arthur had only dared to call in for a quick one, and had escaped from their ribald tongues as hastily as he could. She'd noticed the difference in her housekeeping money. She looked again at the tempting eggs. Why, she could make something real nice for the kids with them, and Mrs. Roberts wasn't likely to miss them anyway. She spoke kindly to her son. "That was real nice of her. A real lady, Mrs. Roberts. I'll put 'em safe in the cupboard," and she whisked them hastily away. She didn't want awkward questions from Arthur anyway, and somehow, well, out of sight was out of mind, wasn't it? At least said soonest mended. Sensible sayings, both of them. "And this is what I done today," Joseph's voice broke in on her thoughts. "Miss Gray done the door for me, but I cut up the lines myself." He held up a small paper house, grubby and woefully askew. His face glowed with the pride of creation. "Ain't it lovely?" "Pity they don't learn you nothing better than that stuff," said his mother shortly, still smarting from a guilty conscience. "Them new teachers don't half fill you up with rubbish. Time you has learnt something useful." But she suffered him to prop it on the windowsill, and there he leant, gazing through the tiny open door at the window beyond. Tomorrow he'd cut out little men and women from the paper, he told himself happily, and they could all live together in his house, his very own house. He sighed blissfully at the thought of all the joy ahead. Next door, Jimmy and Kathy Waits were at tea. This was what Mrs. Waits called a scratch meal, as they would be having high tea soon after 6 when the rest of the family returned from Caxley. As the children chattered together and munched bread and shop honey, she studied an advertisement in her favorite women's weekly magazine. "I'd half a mind to," she murmured to herself. "Only 1 in 3, it's a savings really. That last lot of nail varnish was never really my right color." She inspected her hands minutely. Despite housework and vegetable peeling, they were still pretty. "Don't want to let myself go," she told herself, peering down at her reflection in the glass-bottomed tray. "Be as slummocky as that creature next door." And with one of her sharp nails, she began to claw out this week's amazing offer to our readers. Jimmy was intent on the label on the honey jar. He now knew his sounds and was beginning to find that by piecing them together, real words sometimes evolved. He was agog to read, to be able to sit as Kathy did with her head in a book, sometimes looking sad, sometimes laughing, flicking over the magic pages that unrolled a story for her. "Mad from," he began painfully. "It's got an E on it," said Kathy exasperatedly. "You know what Miss Gray said. It says its name, not its sound. Not mad, silly, made." "Made from," repeated Jimmy meekly, and began maddeningly on pure, with all its phonetic downfalls. Kathy fidgeted restlessly as he struggled. A thought struck her. "Mum, I never told you yesterday. I got to do the next bit of that exam next week. Miss Reed says. If I gets through, I can go to Caxley." Mrs. Waits looked up from the scraps of paper, round-eyed. "Well, aren't you a one? My, I'm glad, Kath. You do your best, love, and if you gets it, well, we'll let you go somehow." Visions of uniforms, hockey sticks, satchels, and other paraphernalia flickered before her. It would cost a mint of money. But there others managed, didn't they? And if the kid was clever enough to get to Caxley High School, or whatever its newfangled name was, she'd see she was turned out nice. She looked again at her daughter's dark head, close to Jimmy's flaxen one, as she explained the intricacies of sugar to him, and let herself dwell for an indulgent minute on the memory of the dark good looks of Kathy's father. He was a card, no mistake, she thought, blushing slightly. She pulled herself together and rose to clear the table. No good thinking on past events. Some people would say she'd been bad, but she didn't believe anything that could make you so happy could be all bad. She stood still, butter dish in hand, puzzling over the niceties of moral conduct. "Ah, well," she said at length, giving up the struggle to straighten the tangled skein, "I've got a real good husband to think about now." And shutting the memory away in the secret drawer that all pretty women have, she went to put on the potatoes for his supper. Mrs. Finch Edwards was sitting on Mrs. Moffat's couch, admiring the new rug which lay before the tiled hearth, and listening to Mrs. Moffat's account of Linda's progress under Miss Reed. "She can read anything, you know, never had any difficulty with that, but surely she ought to know all her tables by 8 years old. Didn't you teach them that in your room?" "Only a few," said Mrs. Finch Edwards. "These days they don't expect children to start all that stuff as young as we did." "Then it's time things were altered," said Mrs. Moffat decidedly. "How's Linda going to tackle the arithmetic paper in the exam if she's still feeling her way round stuff she should have learnt in the infant's room? What'll we do if she don't get through to Caxley High School? I don't know. You know my husband's not one to worry, but I know money's short. This house took more than we thought, and the shop's not doing too well." Mrs. Finch Edwards studied her friend's worried countenance and offered what comfort she could. "You don't have to worry about Linda. She's got a couple of years yet, and she's bright enough. As for money, well, we all worry about that, don't we? Yes, but this is worse than usual. I promised Linda she shall have dancing lessons next term at Caxley, and now, well, I really don't know how we can do it, and she's that set on it." "And so are you," thought Mrs. Finch Edwards, torn between pity and exasperation at this exhibition of maternal ambition. "Can't you take in a bit of dressmaking?" she asked dubiously. Mrs. Moffat looked slightly offended. "It's not quite the thing, is it? A little shop now, the sort of idea we were talking about, that's different. But there again, you need capital. I don't like to say too much to Len. He always takes me up so short, saying other people can do on what we get. I tell him maybe they've no desire to better themselves." There were footsteps outside, and Linda burst in. "Hello, Auntie. Hello, Mom," she said, standing there panting and sniffing. "Wipe your nose," said her mother, rather put out at her daughter's tousled appearance before a visitor. Linda rubbed her nose across her knuckles in a perfunctory way. Mrs. Moffat's voice rose to a horrified scream. "For pity's sake, Linda, where do you pick up such ways? That common school—" She turned a scandalized glance at Mrs. Finch Edwards. "Where's your hanky?" "Lost it," returned her daughter. "Then go and get one," said her mother, "and wash yourself and do your hair," she called after the retreating child. "You see what I mean?" she appealed to her friend. "She's getting as bad as the rest of them, and what can I do about it? If only I could get her to those dancing lessons. She might meet some better-class children there." She rose to get the tea ready. At the door, she turned with a refined shudder. "I'd never thought to see a daughter of mine common," she said. It was arithmetic lesson, and the classroom was quiet. Both blackboards were covered with sums, and the three groups groaned over such diverse problems as half a pound of butter at 4 shillings a pound in the lowest group to 6 pence as a decimal in pounds in the highest one. Beside me sat Kathy, who was being shown once again the mysteries of long multiplication. She had some difficulty with this type of sum, though normally intelligent enough, and with the examination so near, I felt we really must master this particular problem. We were interrupted by the clang of the paint bucket and heavy footsteps in the lobby. Mr. Roberts' large head came round the door. "Sorry to interrupt," he said in what he fondly imagined was a whisper. The children looked up, delighted at this welcome interruption. Who knows, Mr. Roberts might have the old blackboard down again. Their eyes sparkled at each other. And what could be more delightful than that in the middle of an arithmetic test? "Can I have a word with you alone?" he asked. I sent Kathy back to her desk with a long multiplication sum to attempt and followed him into the lobby. His big face was distressed. "Look here," he began. "I don't like suspecting people, as you know." He stopped and studied his boot so long that I felt he needed some assistance. "Well, come on, out with it," I said peremptorily. "They'll be copying wholesale in there if I don't get back quickly." Mr. Roberts shifted uncomfortably, took a deep breath, and rattled it all out. It appeared that he had been missing eggs from the hen house and had marked some very early that morning and put them back in the nest. He went to collect them at 9:30, and they had vanished. Would I mind, here he peered earnestly at me and turned deep red, if he looked through the children's pockets? I said I thought we should ask the children first if they knew anything about the missing eggs. Then they would have the chance to own up. An unhappy silence greeted my inquiries. No one knew anything about the eggs. Blue eyes, brown eyes, hazel eyes met mine in turn as I looked at their upturned faces. I nodded to Mr. Roberts, who returned miserably to the lobby. This was obviously hurting him as much as it hurt us, as I thought with some amusement. "Get on with your work again," I said, and pens were resumed abstractedly. Tongues twirled from the corners of mouths, and superficially at least all seemed normal. But there was a tension in the air. The door opened again, and Mr. Roberts beckoned me out with an enormous forefinger. "Oh, miss," came a choked cry as I went toward the door. It was Eric who had called out, his normally pale face suffused with a pink flush. Tears stood in his eyes. "What is it, Eric?" "Nothing, miss, nothing," he said with a sob, and putting his head down in his arms, his shoulders began to shake. His neighbors looked at him in astonishment and pity. Out in the lobby, Mr. Roberts held open the pocket of Eric's raincoat. There, carefully wrapped in dock leaves, were 3 eggs. Each had a tiny cross on its side from Mr. Roberts' pencil. "Will you deal directly with this?" I asked, "or shall I make it a caning job?" Mr. Roberts' unhappy face became aghast. "Oh, by no means, not caning. Such little children," he began incoherently. "They're quite big enough to know the difference between right and wrong," I said firmly. "But if you feel that way about it, I shall hand him over to you and content myself with a short lecture about this." Mr. Roberts twisted his great hands together, and I felt a twinge of compunction for his soft heart as I opened the classroom door. "Eric," I called, "come here a moment." With a dreadful, shuddering sigh, Eric lifted his mottled face. Slowly he came toward the lobby, where Mr. Roberts awaited him with quite as much agitation of spirit. I looked at them both as the distance between them dwindled, and then returned to the classroom, leaving the coats and hats to witness the meeting between accuser and accused. "And I give a few to little Joe Coggs," Eric had sniffed to me later, "'cause he saw me taking him, and I never wanted him to say nothing." History lesson about a little Roman boy to whom the children were becoming much attached was sacrificed to a lecture on respect for other people's property, common honesty, the power of example, and the evil of leading others into bad ways. It was a much chastened class that settled down to its nature lesson about the common newt, several of which disported themselves in a glass tank at the side of the room. I left them drawing sharply spiked backs and starfish feet, and went into the next room to bring home to Joseph Coggs the wickedness of his crime. "And another 2?" Miss Gray was asking, stacking milk bottles in pairs into the crate. "4," chorused the group clustered round her. "And another 2? 6. And 2 more?" The milk bottles clinked again. 8. This rather more doubtfully. Miss Gray left them to count again and straightened her back to greet me. I told her the story and asked if I might take Joseph out into her lobby. "I wanted to see you about my digs," said Miss Gray, who had been with us now about a fortnight. "Us make it 7, shouted one of the mathematicians by the milk crate. "Count again," advised Miss Gray. "We're getting ready for the 2 times table tomorrow, but heavens, what murder it is." "What is the matter at Mrs. Pratt's?" I asked. "Well, you know how it is," she began uncomfortably. "Tell me later," I said, taking Joseph's sticky hand and leading him from the class to the quiet order of the lobby. Mrs. Pringle's copper was humming merrily as I drew from Joseph the sorry tale of his part in the egg crime. Fat tears coursed down his face and splashed onto his dirty jersey. "Me mom put 'em in the cupboard, and we had one each for breakfast when our dad had gone to work." His tears flowed afresh as he burst out. "Nothing ain't nice today. My little house, what I took home, my dad used it to light his pipe this morning. He never cared. He never cared." Truly, Joseph Coggs suffered much. When the storm had spent itself, I gave what tardy consolation I could by telling him that it was treacle tart for dinner, and he might make another little house. The tears dried miraculously. "But mind," I added in a firm schoolmarm voice, "there's to be no more stealing. You understand?" "Yes, miss," answered Joseph with a repentant sniff. but I noticed his eyes were on the school oven. Chapter 14, The Jumble Sale. For the past week, posters announcing the jumble sale to be held in the schoolroom in aid of the church roof fund had fluttered from the wall by the bus stop, the grocer's window, and from a hook in the butcher's shop. At the end of afternoon school, Miss Gray and I pushed back to the creaking partition between our rooms and trundled the heavy desks into a long L-shaped counter in readiness for the people who were coming to price the jumble before the public were admitted at 7 o'clock. "I wish I could help you with the pricing," Miss Gray said, puffing slightly with her exertions, "but I do so want to go to the orchestra practice, and it begins at 6:30. "How are you getting into Caxley?" "Mr. Annett said he would fetch me and bring me back. I knew him a little through the people I used to stay with in Caxley. They play in the orchestra, too." We sat down at the desks to get our breath and surveyed our filthy hands. "Miss Clare's coming to tea," I said. "She's helping with the jumble sale. Can you stop for tea with us?" "I'd rather not, many thanks. I must collect my violin and music, and I shall need to change. Which reminds me, it looks as though I shall have to leave Mrs. Pratt's, I'm afraid." "Isn't it working out well? I know it's not ideal, but digs are hopeless in a village." "It's partly that, although I hadn't thought of complaining." She gave me a sidelong smile. "I hang a towel over the nymph in the river each night, and my petticoat over the dying dog. I really haven't the heart to say anything to Mrs. Pratt about removing them." "Is it the food?" "Lord, no, I get more than I want. No, Mrs. Pratt's mother has just died over at Springbourne, and they'll want my room for her father. He's evidently going to make his home with them. In a way, it solves my problem. But what on earth shall I do about other digs? I feel I can't live too far away. I can't afford a car, and the buses from Caxley just don't fit in with school hours." "You can have my spare bedroom until you find somewhere that you really like. I'll make more inquiries, but don't worry unduly. If Mrs. Pratt wants you out quickly, come to me for a time." Her thanks were cut short by the arrival of Miss Clare, who propped up her venerable bicycle in its old accustomed spot by the stone sink in the lobby. She looked well and rested and greeted us in her gentle voice. "We don't begin pricing until 5 o'clock, I told her, so we've plenty of time to go and build our strength up with tea." Miss Gray made her farewells and hastened off to Mrs. Pratt's to get ready for Mr. Annett, and Miss Clare and I dawdled arm in arm in the playground to watch the rooks as they wheeled about the elms, sticks in beaks, busily furbishing up their nests for the arrival of the new young occupants. Mrs. Pringle and the vicar's wife, Mrs. Partridge, were already shaking out vests and sorting out shoes when Miss Clare and I went over to the school. We each carried a blue marking pencil, shamelessly purloined from the school stock cupboard, paper, scissors, and pins. Good evening, Mrs. Partridge greeted us, bustling along the line of desks with a pair of antique dancing shoes in her hand. They were pale gray in color, with a strap and 2 buttons. The toes were sharply pointed, with heels of the Louis type, and they looked about size 2. It would be interesting to see who bought them. Such lovely things, continued Mrs. Partridge with professional enthusiasm. So very good of people to give so generously. Mrs. Partridge, from years of experience, knew the necessity of praising everything sent to a jumble sale, for, to be sure, any adverse comment is bound to be overheard, if not by the donor, then by some dear friend who feels impelled to impart the tidings. Life in a village demands a guard on the tongue, and none knows this better than the vicar's wife. Now, shall we put the things out first? Men's clothing here, women's here, and children's at the end. We thought shoes on this form near the door, and hats, such an attractive collection, don't you think, in the far corner? What about admission money? Asked Mrs. Pringle. Who's taken that? Mrs. Partridge looked a little flummoxed. The posters haven't said anything about admission. I think we must let people in free. A great mistake, in my opinion, rejoined Mrs. Pringle heavily. Her mouth began to turn down ominously. At Caxley last week, the Baptists charged 3p and no hard feeling. But if you don't want the money. Mrs. Pringle shrugged her massive shoulders as one who washes her hands of the whole affair and began worrying at the tape that bound several pairs of men's corduroy trousers together. Well, 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 clucked Mrs. Partridge in a conciliatory way, and this shall be the junk stall. China, you know, and jewelry, and any odds and ends. Mr. Willett has very kindly offered to sell raffle tickets for this basket of eggs. Mr. Robert sent them over. So kind, so kind. We all trotted to and fro, carrying everything from derelict footstools to babies' binders to their appointed places. A particularly hideous table with 3½ legs and a top so mutilated with Indian carving as to render it quite useless impeded us seriously in our movements. Who on earth, said Mrs. Partridge, shaken from her normal caution, sent that dreadful thing? Mrs. Pringle's breathing became more stertorous than usual, and her eyes glittered dangerously. Trembling, our fingers fluttered with the price tickets and our heads bent down, Miss Clare and I awaited the breaking of the storm. "That table," began Mrs. Pringle with awful deliberation, "that beautiful table was a wedding present to Pringle's mother from her mistress what she worked for from the age of 12, and as loyal a girl her mistress could never have wished for." Mrs. Partridge was beginning her apologies, but they were brushed aside. "And furthermore," went on Mrs. Pringle, very loudly indeed, and with one hand upraised as though taking the oath, "the dear old lady had it stood by her bedside till her dying day. She had her Bible on it close to her hand and all her other needs." She paused for breath, and Mrs. Partridge hastened in with, "I'm sure, Mrs. Pringle, I meant nothing derogatory." "Such as," continued Mrs. Pringle in a fearsome boom, "her indigestion tablets, her teeth, her glasses, and a very fine clock given her by Pringle and myself on the occasion of her 80th birthday, and much admired by all her visitors. And well it might be, considering the shocking price that shark in Caxley asked for it." "Well, I'm sorry you should feel upset," persisted Mrs. Partridge, "and I hope you will accept my apology." Mrs. Pringle bared her teeth for a moment and inclined her head graciously. "It has associations, that table, and I don't like to hear ill spoke of it. A friend of the family, you could say." "Quite, quite," said the vicar's wife in a final kind of way, and she and Mrs. Pringle continued in silence to pin tickets along the men's stall, while Miss Clare and I, who had retired in a cowardly way with our blue pencils to the hat department, tried to appear unconcerned and efficient, and failed, I fear, to look either. So don't criticize the table. We'll continue next time.